welcome. So just around the room, I'm going to start off with, last but not least, Candice Roberts from Call Force. Hi, welcome, Candice.
Thanks so much, Rod. Great to be here.
And then we have Beverley Dickson, who is an independent consultant, but with many, many years in the short-term insurance industry. So hi, Bev.
Hi, Rod. Hi, everybody.
And Nosihle, and I have to correct the spelling on the screen, but never too late. But Nosi, thanks for joining us. And Nosi comes from many years in the quality and compliance in sales environment, and now is one of my colleagues with Corby. So welcome. So as we go around the room very quickly, Candice, once again, because you started, why don't you give me a high level of how you see quality and compliance in your world of BPO and service in that environment. So your high level view of quality and compliance in your context.
Sure. So for those of you who don't know me that well, I'm Candice Roberts, CEO of Call Force. It's been my 25th year of running this business. And the BPO business is always an exciting one with many, many different things that are challenging on a different and daily basis. And QA and compliance are a very significant part of what we deliver. When we look at compliance, obviously in contracting with our end customer, being many of the large local and international brands, there are very specific requirements that we need to fulfill, whether we selling services, via voice or different channels, or it might be collecting, or it might be sales or service. There are specific things that we need to do and comply with. And so you've got that one aspect, which is quite hard and finite and black and white. And then on the other side, you have got quality that sits alongside it, that's really checking compliance to a large degree, but, is more so the heartbeat for me of our organization. It's where we assess and see what is actually happening in the consumer interaction. And, there are just so many opportunities to refine processes, to optimize training, and we'll talk a little bit about it as we go through, but it is absolutely critical and vital. And I think sometimes there's this sort of construct that QA is compliance without really this real service and customer satisfaction and that word CX that we love to bandy about. This is really where you identify what is happening in your consumer's world as they're engaging with you. So I try to find a good balance between those two, because they're both critical to the success of delivering a service. But for me, I try and see how can we utilize, for instance, technology to cater for the compliance factor so that we've got more time to spend on the customer satisfaction and that customer journey and optimizing it.
We'll certainly be drilling down into some of those areas, the use of AI, the use of technology, and how that's impacting both the captive contact center industry, but more specifically in the BPO, where it's very often a critical factor. Bev, you've, as an independent consultant nowadays, but drawing on your 20 plus years in the insurance industry. Talk to us about your views on quality and compliance and where they overlap or don't. And your views will be very important to the discussion.
Yeah, so I think just to start off with is that, compliance can hurt your reputation and your reliability with your customers. We all know that in the financial services industry, the regulations around the FSCA are quite strict, and that you could be fined some really heavy penalties. So when it comes to quality, I think quality does assist in checking to see that you are complying and to avoid those penalties. But I think, later on when we talk about it from a customer experience point of view, I'd like to use one or two examples where let's not take things from a literal point of view, which I think we often do, particularly in the financial services world. We want to do these little tick boxes and make sure we don't get into trouble with the FSCA. And that's not really what the intention was around all these regulations. It is there to protect the customer. But I think there are other innovative ways of how you can comply without impacting your customer experience.
That's a very good point you raised there, because if we become too analytical in terms of compliance, are we dropping the ball in terms of the customer experience?
Yes.
Are we making it too onerous? If we look in the new world of the insurances, all those long-winded compliance statements, how does that impact a customer? So let's come back to that shortly. But Nosihle, you've come into the Corby world as a trainer, as a consultant, as an analyst, but you've come from a sales environment of many years there. I'd be interested in your views of how your views may have changed since moving away from the hardcore sales environment into technology. So high level on, let's look at quality and compliance from a sales point of view, the things that you were looking for when you were heading up the quality and compliance component.
Yeah, so there's a combination of things when you're looking at sales. So for sales that are more regulated, like your insurance sales, it's more or less straightforward. There are statements that you need to say, there's things that you need to follow at a certain point and so forth. But in all the other sales, type of sales like telecoms, for instance, you look at, is the customer really buying what they are, are you really explaining what the right concept? So if you are selling a green lotion, customer thinking I'm buying a green lotion, or they're thinking they're buying a red lotion, for instance. And we know agents can get really creative. I don't know if that's the right word. They can get really
Oh, we're having a bandwidth issue here. Nosihle, just can I put you on pause for a moment? Nosihle, so I'm going to put you on pause.
So you look at, okay, fine. Sorry?
Okay.
Oh, we lost you for a second then.
Nosihle, we lost you there for a second.
Can you hear me now?
Issue. We can hear you now. Yeah, can you go back to where you were?
Sorry, guys, I'm switching in between two connections, so please bear with me. I might be like a bit of a pain. Right, so I don't know where you lost me.
I think we started talking about the quality and compliance in the sales environment. So
yeah, so
just a high level view on that.
In a sales level environment, you need to look at, is the agent explaining it correctly? But moreover, you're also looking at other things that can help you build on your sales. So are they explaining it correctly? Are they handling objections correctly? Are they, treating customers fairly and so forth? So there are other combinations besides just the compliance part. So the compliance part is the mandatory statements that they need to say, and the other part is the experience out of it. So is the customer happy with what they're buying? Do they look like they are going to cancel, and so forth? So it's a bit of a combination.
Excellent. Candice, back to you, the wonderful world of BPO.
Yes.
Let's just explore briefly, particularly where you're under strict SLAs with some of your BPO contracts, the compliance component. And let's separate it for a moment from the quality component. To what extent is compliance a critical factor in the BPO contract and the SLA?
Well, I mean, we are a registered financial services provider in South Africa. So compliance is exceptionally strict just from where we start. You know what I mean? And we look at some of the financial services contracts. I mean, the compliance, as Beverley was mentioning, there really is no room for maneuver. So, compliance, we have to follow, the script as an example to the T. There can be no deviation whatsoever, for instance, when you're closing with terms and conditions as an example. So, looking for opportunities to automate components of that sometimes make the customer quite disengaged is a primary focus for us. So, if we look, for instance, in financial services specifically, there's very, very little room for maneuver, and you've got to follow it absolutely strictly. To Beverley's point, I think it is important for agents to understand why. Sometimes we just tell them this is what you must do, but not really understanding the significance of why these kind of regulations have been put in place. So, I think agent education is critical, and obviously, real-time feedback as fast as you can to the agents when they have transgressions, because this would now become a transgression in terms of compliance. It's quite serious. So you want to rectify their behavior very quickly, and then be monitoring again to assess compliance to, what the prescribed manner is. So we find, since we've automated the actual system that we utilize to record the, as we record the QA scorecard and the, against the live call, we are escalating it then real time to the team leader and to HR where there's, a serious transgression, to be able to deal with it immediately. So there's not really a lag factor. And, that also makes it far more real. If you're coming back to agents a month later, a week later, 2 weeks later, it just doesn't have the same impact. Even if, if it's, let's say, a minor transgression, because a serious one would, I think, be very differently viewed. But if it's minor, they might be doing that, 20, 30, 40 times over before it's raised. So I think the speed of raising these issues and dealing with it. Yeah. Yes, but firstly, educating people around the significance and importance of why we're placing a priority, and why our client and the industry sector places a priority on it. I think definitely does, we find, minimize. It minimizes the number of times you might see those kind of occurrences.
Okay, excellent.
So, Rod, I'd like to weigh in there. So, the safest way is obviously to script these compliance statements that you need to, say to your customer. But I just want to give you guys a tip. I recently worked with an insurer, and it was in the retentions division. So you can imagine when a customer comes through, they're either financially vulnerable, or they're frustrated and irritated, and that's why they want to cancel their policy. And in analyzing the calls, the first 3 minutes was just all this compliance scripting that was coming through, which impacted the rapport that they needed to build with the customer. And by the time you've got through all the scripting, who wants to then listen to an agent who's trying to save you? So in short, what I want to share with you is, there is some scripting, and I'm talking about an inbound call center, that you could put into your IVR, such as our phone calls are recorded, or our agents are phase compliant, or working under supervision, or FSP license, etc. So, getting back to my earlier point and the impact on customer experience, let's not be too rigid in the way we do it. Yes, we need to comply, we need to inform customers, but there are other ways around it, where if it's going to impact the customer experience, in the example that I'm giving here, which you can't use in all instances, let's just not forget who is at the end of this journey, and that is the customer.
Maybe Rod,
Very
can
good.
I add to that quickly,
Yeah,
just
please,
around,
Candice,
because
your
that
views
sort
would
of
be
built
very
on what
important.
I was saying around, you know, financial services. Obviously, there's very specific
Yes.
requirements there, but I agree with you, Beverly. You know, I think sometimes these scripts were written what feels like hundreds of years ago by someone probably from the legal side of the business, and it's not necessarily very customer centric. So I find, you know, finding the script balance where you're achieving compliance but at the same time not messing with a great customer experience is really critical. But in other industries that, you know, are maybe not as strict, but there are compliance requirements, like for instance in the telco sector, you know, it's also to look at what, as you pointed out, what can be automated. Can the terms and conditions be emailed to them? Can they accept it while you're on the call? You know what I mean? It doesn't necessarily mean, okay, I'm now going into the 5-minute dialogue around all the terms and conditions. And so I find those industries that are slightly less regulated, I think there is a lot of room for redesigning the compliance component into shorter, friendlier snippets that still achieve the legal compliance that are you know, that protect our consumer.
Very good point. Nosihle, I'm going to ask you now, because you're in a unique position where you're engaging with 100 and something plus customers using speech analytics technology. So you're engaging with customers across the whole spectrum, from customer service to collections to sales, etc. What is your view on how technology is being used to ensure compliance on the one hand, but the other hand, I haven't heard the term used this morning yet, the voice of the customer. Today the technology will allow us to listen to every word, every syllable. What is your view of how this has been instrumental in changing the way the industry is starting to look at both quality and compliance?
That's what Candice said. Speech analytics and the tools that businesses are using now allows the customers to get that data real time. So instead of waiting for somebody to listen to a call later on, maybe later the next day, and give feedback, by the time that feedback goes back, it's like 2 days later. You have the ability to look at it as soon as it's uploaded. You have the ability to look at the outcomes and take decisions based on that. If there's a coaching needed, you're able to make data-driven decisions to help you improve your business. And you're able to identify where there is a training need, not just in compliance only, in other information, like, you know, when you're touching on customer experience, where you can see that an agent has a long hold periods in a call, or they've got silences. You've got the data real time, and where you can go in and look into, okay, so why is this agent slow? Why is this agent putting customer on hold all the time? Because that's also affecting customer experience. You're able to go in and listen to the call and say, okay, no, there's a training gap here, or maybe agent is struggling with the system, and you're able to assist in order to make sure that customer experience is improved.
Okay, we're going to come back and look at that relationship between compliance and scripting versus, you know, free flow, conversational style with agents, impact on customer experience. But we've got a question come in from one of our registrants, Hilaria Finandero. Hilaria is a independent consultant out there in our call center world. I want to ask Hilaria to come in live and actually ask your question. Hilaria, are you there? There we go. Hilaria.
Can you hear me?
Yes, got you.
We can.
Thank you. Hi, thank you, Rod, and thanks for all the the delegates for giving us your time and your wisdom around this. I essentially just wanted to find out.
Lost you there for a second. Are you back, Hilaria? Hey.
For a second, I thought it was my unstable connection again.
Looks like Zoom is giving us some Zoom around the room today. Hilaria, we've got you. Valeria's question, which is put in the chat line, if I can ask it on your behalf, Valeria, is asking the panel, what are the biggest blind spots where BPO or call center organizations think they are compliant, but in fact are less than ideally compliant? Who would like to pick up that call? I think it's focused on BPO, because Candice, I want to ask you to have a look at that. Where does the organization assume it's compliant? What are the realities out there?
Can I?
Yes, I thought you might be well qualified, having a look at many different environments.
So I think the biggest one would be in an environment where you are still doing manual QA, and you've got manual, which are humans that are picking calls to QA. And we know if I've got a target, I'm going to pick the most easiest call, maybe shortest call. So in those type of calls, I'm not going to find any issues. So, and when you look at the quality at the end of the week, it's like, okay, no, everybody is doing well. But when you really dig deep into it, when you really start listening to a bigger sample, then you realize, no, I'm actually not compliant, because I had a human who was just picking, a simpler call so that they can hit their target and move forward. But now that I'm looking at entire, conversations holistically, then you realize, no, I'm really not there. That's one of it.
I'd pick up on that, definitely. Obviously we're dealing with often small sample sizes, or we're dealing with 100%, for instance, as an example, in the outbound sales world, 100% of sales calls. So in other words, where we closed a sale. But obviously there's also many components in the non-sales calls that we're not necessarily listening to that do stem from non-compliance. So an agent might be misleading a customer. Maybe they don't actually buy the product, but we're going to pick it up in the sales call versus, there might be thousands upon thousands of non-sales calls as an example. And, so that's where compliance specifically in an automated version works exceptionally well to maybe highlight, the 5 or 10 things that are critical in terms of compliance. And, so that can be escalated very quickly. And then, your softer issues around QA and the customer journey and the customer experience, we can spend more time, as I said earlier, having our QAs address those and the nuances of what that looks like versus checking for the actual compliance factor. So I think that's where the big benefit comes in, because then you can also start to pull specific trends. You can see, ideally, where is a trend in your own organization or across a campaign. You can design training, coaching, whatever, your peer-to-peer coaching, possibly where some agents are really, really good at that particular aspect of dealing with a call. And that's where the power comes into play. Because sometimes, I find if QA are only doing a small sample size, their actual view of where things need to be addressed can be a bit slanted, depending on the sample size and what specific you're listening to.
Bev, I can see you've got something in your mind. But...
Candice just triggered something with me. So, something that we find in the sales environment in insurance is where salespeople are very naughty and they tell the customers, I'm going to send you the documentation, and the customer doesn't want the policy, and just read through it and you can come back and cancel at any time. So I think specifically with speech analytics, what I've found as a benefit is, there are keywords that you can actually put in and search for, where we can then pick up where these agents are not complying or actually being very naughty in the way they are selling policies. And again, you can do volumes versus where Nosihle was saying earlier on, the old traditional method of QA people just listening to short calls or a small sample 5 per agent per month or whatever, you're not going to pick that up. So, yeah, there's a lot of benefit around that.
Yeah, you touched on something now, which is agent behavior. Candice, you've had, 25 years of dealing with the wonderful world of agents and the anomalies and the shenanigans that go with it. Are you using the QA and compliance monitoring to mold agent behavior through coaching, where disciplinary action is necessary?
So let me
on that.
So let me, so maybe just in terms of the QA journey in our organization starts at the very early stages of someone being onboarded with Callforce. So, through training, QA already coming in and dealing with the modules themselves around QA for that specific campaign, the compliance scorecard, as well as the quality scorecard that we are using, how they are scored, what are serious transgressions, what are the implications of those, so because we must remember they're taking in a whole lot of information. And even if they've come from that specific industry sector, they, every business operates so differently in terms of their systems, their processes, how hard or soft they are around certain issues. So, that's where the journey starts. Then, on the larger campaigns, they move into what we call incubation, where again, QA come in and spend a lot more time than they would with the average person on the floor and in terms of engagement, to take them now through their own scorecard, in respect of live calls that they've handled. And in the incubation phase, you sort of have a ratio of 1 to 5 agents to a coach, and then the QA is coming in and giving very interactive feedback on a daily basis. So end of day, they wrap up like that, and then identify what everyone needs to focus on the following day. And then by the time you get to the end of that, they're graduating from, incubation into the live floor. So, by incorporating now QA already through the training and the incubation process, when they hit the floor, it's not like suddenly, oh my gosh, here comes this factor, now I'm going to be rated on what I'm doing. They're actually quite used to that through the process. And now it doesn't become possible for QA to be giving one-on-one feedback. So, the system that we utilize, we score it on the system. It's linked to a person, and if there's a problem, it escalates immediately, as I said earlier, to the team leader, so that there can be intervention like now. If it's something that's a very serious transgression, then the team leader escalates it immediately to HR, and they will come in with that disciplinary process. But what I'd like to, what I always try and remind everyone, that after 25 years of agents and working with agents, I'm still in awe of them when I go onto our complaints onto the floor, because they have the most incredibly tough job out there. And when we talk about the transgressions and the shenanigans, it's always such a small percentage of your broader floor. Most of them are really good, and they really want to come to work, and they want to do a great job. So the majority of QA should really be about highlighting where their opportunities are to develop, and providing the coaching by the team leader on a daily basis to close those gaps, so that they can go from good to excellent to exceptional. That must be their journey. So I don't see, the compliance part and the QA, which obviously is part of our QA model. I don't see it as a negative. I actually see it as an opportunity to acknowledge people. Even if they're not doing everything right, there's always something that they're doing right. We are looking at an entire call with so many components that they need to meet. We just mustn't forget to celebrate the good stuff and feedback on that, as well as guide and coach or train or reprimand in the appropriate the appropriate time.
You raise some very good points, and I'll come to Nosihle, because I'm going to bounce the ball right over to you on that one, because in your current role, where you are right at the rock face implementing technology into the environment where Big Brother is going to be watching every move going forward. What are your observations in terms of change management from a group of agents who might have been only randomly QA'd in the past to now every single call is monitored for compliance and quality and agent behaviors? What's your experience now of, let's look at the change management components.
You know, Rod, I think what works in some of the organizations that I've helped implement is businesses need to look at having a customer compliance or a quality-centric, culture. If that is already there, it's a Big Brother is not going to be a problem because everybody already has this quality mindset that I need to provide to our clients. Problem comes when quality, and I don't know why this is the case in most businesses. Quality and sales are always like working at the tail, like at the end of each other. It's a constant, not getting along or just disagreements. So when you are bringing speech analytics into your business, the first thing that the team leader will say is, "Oh, now they're going to listen to all of your calls. So tough luck for you." And if you're going with that, obviously the agents are not going to be happy. Obviously, there's going to be some demotivation coming along. So it depends on how you brief it in, depends on how you pitch it and then how you explain it to the agents. Like Candice said, if you're saying this is an opportunity, it's going to help you identify where you need to improve, then there's no issue. But if you're coming with a stick, then they're going to take it as a negative too.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Beverley, there's a question come in, I think you can see it there, from one of the attendees. And the question is, how important is L&D and training of a business to have involvement in the overall QA journey in order to continuously develop and mitigate risks? And you're the risk and compliance specialist here. So in your experience working in one of the largest short-term insurance and companies in the country, balancing between compliance, risk, skills development, training, what are your views on that?
So I think training and L&D can play a critical role in helping mitigate risks, in really training our people to understand why it's important to comply. But there's a lot of other things you can also do, just from a quality perspective. If you can build a knowledge base where you can allow or you give agents access to updates on regulatory and compliance rules, I think that's quite important. And also you can have a library of very good calls where agents are actually getting it right. So to Candice's point earlier on, all too often we forget to recognize people that are getting it right. So from an L&D perspective, yes, giving them that support, giving them access to how it's done well, how it's done properly, and updating them on the changes in regulation.
I think, Rod, maybe just to add to that, often QA, I mean, it's certainly not the case in our business, but what I've seen working with many different companies over the years is that often QA can be quite isolated because they're seen as policemen. And I'm not just talking about the actual QAs themselves, I'm talking about even the leadership. They work like in a silo and quite independently. And, I think where the power really comes is, as I said earlier, you are actually evaluating what is happening in the consumer journey during this call. And, that gives you the power to give in our instance, our clients feedback about broken processes, things that they can change possibly on their end, things that we can suggest potentially that we have access to a system or a tool that can allow us to resolve an issue for a customer there and then, as an example. But also, I mean, one of the most powerful examples I've seen in our own organization is QA working totally in collaboration with training or L&D to develop the content. Because so often you come along and you get a contract and the client says, here we go to train the trainer, here we go, here's the content, and off you go. And you'll find 5 years later someone will be still training that same content. Okay. Meanwhile, you've got QA who's listening to the call, who can hear actually what content does the person need to be trained on, and what is absolutely invalid and actually a waste of time training, in spending all your time up front. So, and which things are the things to spend your time on up front, and which are the things that are better to layer in as agents get a little bit more experience and get those nuances, because sometimes we try and tell them everything up front and then nothing sticks. So, and I'm not talking about the compliance components. I'm now talking about, customer experience and how they engage. I think Beverley mentioned it, how they build rapport. You know what I mean? It's that process. So for us, that's where the magic happens, because then your content, and 9 times out of 10, please, I would really encourage everyone to go and do this. If you look at what you're training versus what is actually effectual or actually relevant or even up to date and current, let your QA look at that. Let your QA team work with your training team to look at that. Because I think there's so much magic to be unpacked in that.
Well, I think you've opened a can of worms here now, but in your experience working with outsourcing clients, customers, who've outsourced their work to you, sent their trainer along with all their standard compliance, etc., where you are picking up these potential to streamline, to change the scripting, etc., how are you finding the client, the customers, your customers' attitude towards the kind of business intelligence that you're feeding back to them and recommendation? Are they amenable to that? Because
it's a great question.
Was the draconian. This is the way it's done. Don't mess with it.
Well, that is where you make the biggest mistake, because as a BPO, the brand you're engaging with, your customers, they are looking for optimization, but they are also they might have developed something a while ago. So what happens generally is you start a contract, and sure, they're wanting new ideas, and but there's a certain limit to it, because you need to prove yourself. You need to show that I can do it as well as you can and possibly better. Okay. And it's only when you get to that point do you really build the trust. So I believe you must continuously feedback. But I regularly encourage our team. Just because someone said no a month ago doesn't mean a month later you don't put it back on the table, or 3 months later, or a year later, sometimes 3 years later. And I'm not only talking about this, but I've got some good examples. So, what generally happens is, as companies work with you, as you start to really deliver great value, they start to listen more closely. And I've got one great example. I can't mention the customer, but it was really in the beginning, don't touch that. Your trainers were accredited that way, and that's it. And that's the only way you are allowed to train it. It's taken many years to evolve, but today, whatever content we put in is what we put in, whether the training is 1 week, 3 weeks, 3 months, it's at our cost anyway, so it's our problem. And the content that goes into that is, strictly speaking, what QA are hearing, what training are, agreeing with, and how that's combined. And then, the third sort of element that's quite important to add into this is analytics. And I don't mean just speech analytics is what we've touched in, but general analytics of what is happening in the environment. Why are customers churning? Why are non-sales calls not buying? Understanding what is the data that we've been given. Is it really a match to what the client or the product that we're selling? All of those things also influence what you're doing. So we find the combination of training, QA, and our analytics team jointly working together is what really helps us, because you need a volume of data often. So you mustn't just look at your QA data. You've got to look at your campaign data and maybe look at what is influencing, what can be taken out of that to feed back into QA, to training, what are we listening for? So for instance, if you are selling, for instance, in the telco space, if you are selling a particular package, are we really listening to and going and checking what was the credit score that we could sell to? Because they're selling, but selling to what? To what value? And if you then go on the data analytics side and say, but the data that we've been given, what is the score generally that's coming through? Are we just selling the easiest package, for instance, that can be sold? And then everyone's ticking the box and we listen to the compliance but what is the lost opportunity in what we are doing? And then it feeds back into QA listening, training on how to optimize the value of the sale. Obviously in line with what the client is genuinely scored for, as an example here. But it's those kind of things that we've seen, those kind of initiatives have in 3 months increased the value of the actual sale by 30-40%. Because agents will also just sell what's the easiest, lowest, least resistance, as an example.
That's the nature of the...
Precisely. So that's where all the opportunity really sits.
But you've opened up a channel here, and I think Bev, a question for you. At what point does the outcomes of quality and compliance start manifesting as business intelligence? And are you finding that the corporate machine is open to maybe changing, altering strategies, tactical moves based on business intelligence coming up from the floor in our wonderful world of contact centers?
Yeah, so I think your question, if I can just confirm, Rod, is really if you're using data and business intelligence, what impact can that actually have on QA? Is that what you're really...
In both ways, it's what impact will it have on how we do the QA and compliance, and the other way around, from based on business intelligence, what impact can it have on the organization's longer term strategies and tactics in terms of their business goals?
Yes, I think data and reporting is quite important. Often I go into organizations and things aren't very visible. So having them visible, it obviously tells the organization what is really happening out there. Yes, it can feed a lot into information for some, talking about business intelligence, feeding the C-suite with a lot more information, and then probably then turning, where they want to take their strategy going forward, particularly around the voice of the customer, understanding what is it that customers really want, and what is the net promoter score or sentiment, if I can just generalize that customers are actually telling you. Because I think in most, and particularly I'm referring to the financial services world, we all sell the same bells and whistles, and the only difference is really the customer experience. So with information that you can get around, what are customers actually saying and what is their sentiments, you can make yourself more competitive out there.
Yeah, and that does make very good sense. Now, Nosi, in your former role, monitoring compliance and quality in a hardcore sales environment, what was your experience in the outputs, the reporting, the business intelligence that you and your team produce into the C-suite, into the decision makers. Was that, were you able to monitor or measure, from your perspective, changes in the organization's strategies?
For a long time, we were manual. So obviously, that monitoring and providing feedback was not as quick as we would have wanted it to. And then when you get your speech analytics, you build identifiers up front that's going to highlight your cancellations, your complaints, and you're able to look at a segregated or a specific set of calls that's going to make you understand what is happening. But when it comes to providing feedback, at the very, like, for a very long time, it was really delayed, because by the time you get all of remember, all of these things are manual. By the time you take information from all the QAs and you put them into one report and you send it back to the business, it's a week later. So that's why when you've got something like a speech analytics, it's just a click of a button and you've got it. So we were able to provide it quicker once we had speech analytics, but before that, it was take way too long.
There's technology once again coming
100%.
to the aid of strategy and tactics. Back to you, Candice. You're using a lot of technology in your environment now. And are you finding that the ability to provide your clients or your clients in this case, with relatively almost real-time feedback, are you getting rebriefs? Are you getting changes in directives from your clients because you're feeding them valuable business intelligence? And as you said earlier, I think we're seeing it right across the BPO space, where those outsourcing customers are looking for optimization. They're looking for that business intelligence.
Well, precisely, and that's where the power of it is, Rod, because, I mean, I'm not going to use the speech analytics example now, but, the capturing the data into a system where you can analyze the trends of what you are listening to as being significant in terms of changes to business processes, for instance, that we've been able to recommend that have had like a direct impact on the CSAT score, or your first call resolution, or it's measurable and it's hard. Like, we don't see QA as a soft, furry thing. It's friendly, but it's actually quite a hard measure. That's as hard as a number. How many sales did you make today? What was your first call resolution today? It's a hard measure. And if we take what comes out of QA as a hard measure and we can consolidate it, we can then identify where the trends are. Because sometimes if you go to a customer as an example and you say, we're seeing, it's this dangerous thing, the assumption. We're seeing this on 1 or 2 calls, and now we make an assumption.
Yeah.
And now we make an assumption that, that's how, the rest of, that's all the agents are doing the same thing. That is really dangerous. I think what's also really important is to be, how many businesses, and I'd be interested to hear from the audience, but I mean, not that they can answer now, but maybe ask yourself the question, how regularly does that QA scorecard change? Is this something that you implement and then you measure like that for the next 5 years? What components of it shift?
Very good.
Because what I have found, very, very powerful is, for instance, I'll give you an example. A customer has their own QA system, and this is the way it works. And that is very scripted, hasn't changed in 5 years. Okay, so what do you do now? Because you want to unpack and delve into certain things. Okay, it's not the same example, but I'll just use the previous one about the value, for instance, of the sale. Okay, so now you want to delve into that, but you've got this prescriptive QA process that is company-wide, locally, globally. It's not something that you are going to be able to change. So you know, the best thing in that instance, but I'd say if you're doing it yourself to regularly change it, there's always a core. There must be some consistency, okay? But the things that we want to delve into should shift. They should change. If we want to delve into the value, why the value is not there, what's causing that the QA is the place to tell us. So, you know, so you can have special projects. You can build scorecards that sit alongside what your clients are doing.
The mandatory
to build on,
exactly.
So, you know, maybe they want to keep it standard. Maybe you want to keep it standard because there's a certain core over years you can measure there, you know, certain metrics. But you want to have those metrics that are also movable so that you can delve into certain aspects, fix them, re-engineer them, and move on to new things. Because that also makes the job of the QA themselves much more exciting. You know, if you're just doing the same thing over and over and over and over again, it's disillusioning. And I think what motivates them the absolute most is when they can see real change happen in the business
as a consequence
thanks to the work. Yeah. So, you know, so if you take, for instance, the speech analytics, and you take that and say, okay, that takes out all of this component of, and we can now spend our time, as I said earlier, on QA doing the kind of things I've been talking about. Sure, then you get a double whammy of, you know, fantastic results.
Great stuff. Okay, we're coming up for a wrap up now. So, Nosihle, going to come to you for your wrap up. High level, your advice to anybody out there running a call center, contact center. Just in summary, quality and compliance. What would your message be without selling products?
Like I said, create a quality-centric environment and culture. Everybody must have the quality hat on. Understand, especially on a sales environment, the sales team would probably be looking at conversion rates and number of sales and so forth, but they also need to keep that hat on so that everybody is speaking the same language. And get, like Candice said, get QA involved, even in the script creation, because they are listening to calls. They understand what works. They understand what doesn't work. They can even give feedback on some of the sales techniques that can be implemented in those scripts. So get them involved. Everybody must speak the same language. Everybody must have the QA hat on, quality hat on, customer experience hat on. Everything will be cool.
And then we are away. Okay, excellent. Bev, your view as a quality and specifically compliance specialist.
Yeah, so comply. Make sure that you are ticking all the boxes when you need to. But I think just in summary for me, again, is, you know, with your quality department, just make sure that you are also listening to the voice of the customer. Because at the end of the day, that is, you know, what businesses are for.
Wonderful. And Candice, your last words.
No, it's such an important function. Please don't let it just be a compliance function, because this is where the power of really putting your customer experience on steroids sits. And as I said, whether you're selling, servicing, collecting, supporting a part of a back office process, it's about creating an exceptional customer experience. And I think quality has such a key role in doing that. So, yeah, let's say thank you to all the quality people out there. It was
wonderful. And in fact,
hard work.
We're now referring to quality people out there as insights analysts.
Exactly.
That's what it's about. In fact, just to close on an anecdote, one of the QAs that I was interviewing a little while back, and this is almost a verbatim, she said, you know, when I was a QA, my manager sometimes listened to what I had to say. Now that I'm an insights analyst, the boardroom listens to what I have to say.
Yeah.
So,
I love that.
as we wrap up on this, ladies, it's been a great pleasure having three wonderful and very experienced experts with us on this panel today. Nosihle, thank you so much. Beverley and Candice.
Thank you so much for having me.
And then also thank you to our sponsors, Corby, Speech Analytics, who actually make these sessions practical and viable and support us. And if anybody is interested in more information about using speech analytics in your contact center, please pop us a line. We'll send you some information, and we're always happy to set up a demonstration. So thank you so much, and have a wonderful week ahead.